the Everything But Politics podcast.
Thank you for joining us here once again on the Everything But Politics podcast. You all know today's guest, and if you say you don't know today's guest, you're lying. She invited me to do my first ever podcast as a guest about a month ago, and it is great to be returning the favor. Lisa Ann, it is great to be with you again. Welcome to the show.
It is great to be not just with you, but also your brother, to get to see this in the reverse is very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Lisa, we saw you were just in Miami for a few days. What was going on down there?
I was there for a trade show. So 4 times a year, Exotica hosts these very sex-positive trade shows in different spots in the U.S. And so I go to as many as I can. I usually do 4 a year. I also will travel to other countries and do them. So I've been to, in the past 5 years, Greece, Switzerland, France. Just tons of places have these shows, and they're a lot of fun to get to be a part of.
And what's it like being greeted by fans when you go to events like this?
Well, it's a mixed bag, okay?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Let me give you an example, okay? There was a guy. I have the screen grabbed message. I have to read this to you. I think it'll bring a lot of entertainment to the open of this show. You know, I don't know if you're both well-versed in the term parasocial relationships. Parasocial relationships are when somebody forms a really one-sided relationship with somebody that they're a fan of, whether it be a podcast they listen to every day, TV show, and eventually in their mind, they truly believe they have a relationship with this person. And then they take that parasocial relationship to the person, and they're shook when you don't feel the same. So I had a guy come in. First night, he came in 2 days in a row. We didn't let him back in the third day. But by the second day, I was like, okay, this guy's freaking me out. And he just kept telling me things about his life. Like he would just stand there and tell me things about high school. And I'm like, okay. You always want to be aware of someone's mental state. Is this person have something that they're up against? So you want to hear them out. So finally he came to me. He's like, look, I think we should be done with this just talking at the booth, and we need to hang out, outside of here. And I said to him, sir, that's not how it works. I'm an entertainer, and I come in, I do these shows, and I agree with. And he's like, well, I don't believe that, so we have to hang out. So I try my best to sell it. This is not happening. He then orders a Cameo, and when he orders the Cameo, it's this crazy message on Cameo. So I'm like, okay, well, now this is in a public forum. I've got to do this Cameo message. I'm going to do it right away. And I'm going to really explain to him, hey, this isn't how it works. So I said to him, look, I feel as if you're trying to kind of force a relationship with me that I'm not welcoming. And I was very kind to you to tell you that I'm not welcoming. He writes for his review, which, by the way, I have never gotten a 1-star review on Cameo. This guy gives me a 1-star review. You're not only creepy, you're throwing down my number. And he writes, I do apologize, but if I had any intentions on demanding we'd spend time, I would have brought a weapon. Now that would have been something different. Okay, whoa. I then have to reach out to Cameo. I'm like, we got to take down this guy's review. I get it if you have to leave it 1 star, but can we have the word weapon in there? And then I showed it to the people at the show, and they're like, okay, we got to find a photo of this guy now. We've got to have him at the door. He's got to be. Now, we do make sure they search people. But when somebody mentions a weapon in their first message after not getting their way, it's very jarring. So there's a large scale of people that are just there to have a good time and have fun. But there's always those 5 or 10 guys that make you wonder if something bad's going to happen.
That's legitimately concerning. Mentioning weapons, I picture the guy in Ted who wants Ted as his bear, and he's totally just a total weirdo. That's what I'm picturing in my head.
Yeah, it's very straightforward on that. There's just more consumption now. Remember, I got into the industry in the 90s. In the 90s, we shot on film. Our movies were released on VHS. It was a different beast. People rented these movies. They watched them occasionally. And it was something that people did for entertainment. Now, adult content has become a streaming choice, something people watch to an unhealthy amount. I tell anybody, if you're watching over an hour a day, this could be a problem. But there's people that get monitored as they go through recovery that were watching 6 to 8 hours a day. I think this guy that mentions the weapon was on the 6 to 8 hours a day tip.
6 to 8 hours.
Yeah, that's just not even right. Especially when you zoom out and consider the compound effect, how many hours that is in a given year, or depending on the person, a decade. It's quite scary. But So when you look back to the 90s to now 2024, how has the like industry evolved in terms of, obviously it's way more consumption than I'm sure there ever has been, but being in it as long as you have, what do you see now?
The need for as much content that you mentioned, the consumption, there's just so much more demand with all these sites and filling all these spaces and all these niches. You know, we shot one movie a month in the 90s. It was a big deal. You went on set for like 4 or 5 days, like 4 days were dialogue. You had craft services and it was a real film. And so it just felt different. It felt very special. It felt like something that you were doing that mattered. Now people are shooting 5 scenes a day, 7 days a week, some companies. How can it matter? How can it be special? And I think what we've done is we've just decided to open up the floodgates and say everybody should do this. And like I look back, I was just going through a list with a friend of mine at the show. And we made a list of the really popular stars from the 90s. And this was before, people were doing a lot of plastic surgery. There were no fillers. It was just so different. Like you couldn't even have a tattoo because nobody wanted to shoot a tattoo. So the women were just beautiful, and it was just a very select group. And I think we just kept things very different. And now it's just this, let's see how much we can get each girl to do in a short period of time. So their careers just last a lot shorter of a time.
Like you said, it's way more mainstream and accessible to get. How do you think that helps or hurts like the younger generations?
I think it completely hurts the younger generation. I think it's content that should be accessed when you have the mental wherewithal to know what you're seeing and doing. I just did a really good speaking event at Temple University, and we surveyed 50 students in this class, and the average age that they started watching was between 10 and 11. And when I got that number, I was so gutted because what I said to the room was like, do you guys realize what I was doing from 10 to 11? Like we were like, is it nice out? If it's nice out, are we playing
Yeah.
catch? Are we playing basketball? Is it winter? Am I skiing? What friends am I going to go walk around the mall with? Like the fact that that has replaced childhood is not good for society. The fact that that has made young people insecure about the way they look, about
Mhm.
them sexually. They're comparing themselves to someone that's older, that's more experienced, that's glamorous. I just feel it's been really detrimental to how young people view themselves and how they feel about their own sexual wellness.
Even if you're not looking for it, especially on Twitter, like it just
Yeah.
pops up on your feed. Twitter like allows that, and even like the Instagram, like the spam bots, all like the fake DMs are like pornographic
Yeah.
sexual stuff. So like,
How do they
I feel
get
like-
my Instagram? I don't understand. Instagram is so strict, but yet I'll
I
get like
know.
50 bots at the end of my comments, and I'll just like, they're all like butt cheeks or something.
Yeah.
And what they're doing is they're using like one word. It'll say like wonderful or beautiful, or because you can't put a keyword in to get them out. So you're like, oh my gosh, you're beating the whole keyword algo protect me on Instagram. A lot of bots. And remember Twitter just like
Yeah.
2 weeks ago announced that they were going to be
Mhm.
like allowing porn, and like I was shocked because I was like, I thought Twitter always allowed porn.
Well,
Yeah.
when I think about any industry for that matter, but COVID, I feel like exposed many flaws in many industries. When you look at 2020, 2021 at the adult film industry, what flaws were exposed?
I think the clickbait articles about everybody making hundreds of thousands of dollars on OnlyFans are a bit baiting and unrealistic because they're not surveying the other people that aren't making that kind of money, right? And they're putting it out there. And from what I've heard is a trend in high school and with young people is like the first thing a girl wants to do now when she turns 18 is start an OnlyFans. And like, I'm not down with that. I think you should
It's
think about it
wild.
for a while. It's going to be on the internet forever. And because it's just in one's phone, I believe that some people don't realize that that content can still be stolen and put on tube sites. And that content that maybe you're not going to make that much money for is going to be there forever. And it's going to change a lot about your life. So I think, what it's exposed is we are propping it up in this space. And I'm quite not sure why yet. I'm waiting till we start to hear the other stories about OnlyFans, the creators that are struggling, or the creators that dealt with stalkers, or whatever it may be, creators not being able to live in a neighborhood because they're not welcome there, like all of those things. We're only hearing this side since the pandemic, and I just don't know why. I don't know why the news is baiting this. They're definitely some sort of signal calling to somewhere or the other, and I'm just waiting to find out when we get the drop of, let's be realistic, not everybody's making that much money. And it's something that I took 2 years to get into. I had to write to the companies in the industry in the late 80s. I had to mail my photos. I had to wait for them to write back. And it gave me a lot of time to really think, is this what I want to do? It concerns me that it's so easy to do now that you don't really have that time to think about it.
And
Yeah.
when you were a young woman, what did lead you to entering the industry? Why did you choose that route?
So I was on my own young, and I started working in clubs that had feature dancers. And when I first started working in clubs, and it's funny, I'm writing my third book right now. And today I was working on this chapter this morning a little bit about talking about like what I'm not good at. And I quickly, as a dancer, realized what I was not good at. I am not good at being mischievous, the sell of like selling a relationship to a guy. And so I realized I would make more money if I was a feature, because they got to come into a club, do their shows for 1 week, and then they leave and they wouldn't come back for another year, maybe 10 months, but like you didn't have to build relationships. I don't like the relationship building. It's just too much. I just wanted to be an entertainer of the masses and have fun. So seeing that really taught me like, okay, where else can you make money in this space? Because this is what you want to do. Okay, great. I started interviewing. I took 2 years. I interviewed all the girls that would come into my club that would let me interview them. Things from like, how do I get on the box cover? How do I get my name incorporated in the title? Who should I work for? Who shouldn't I work for? What do I need to know? And a lot of the women I'm still friends with now that I met when I was 18 years old that gave me great advice that helped me kind of lay out my career as I saw it.
And now that the industry is so much bigger, are the females getting more or less money than
I
when
would
you started?
I would say less, because there's more talent pool, right? And
Yeah.
because we were putting such a big product together, it was a big deal. And then we would do that one movie a month, and we'd go to a bookstore event, we'd sign it. So as a contract girl, you get paid monthly to do these things, right? Your store events, your movies, promotionals for the movies, box cover shoots, this and that. I think probably now there's quite a few male performers that are getting more than a lot of the female performers. And I think that's fair, because I feel the job for the male performer is a bit harder.
And do you think you would ever do it again?
What's changed in the industry now makes me say no, even though I
Mhm.
loved it so much for so many years. And I will say, like, one of the things that really pushed me out was knowing what you're not good at. Again, I go back to that. I didn't love that the industry was going to this heavy ancestral tone. It's all mom and stepmom, and I was like, this is just weird for me. Like, can't we
Yeah.
just have the pool guy show up? Like, where's the pizza guy when you need him? Like, you don't need it to be that weird. I don't need it to be that
Yeah.
weird, but someone thought it needed. And so that kind of pushed me. And then, we've had quite a few evolutions in the past 3 to 5 years when it comes to testing, when it comes to STDs, when it comes to the industry asking talent to take PrEP. Once you start asking me to take medication to stay alive is when I need to go. And I know now how lucky I was to never have anything that was treatable but not curable. And now performers that I know are just accepting the fact that they're going to have something that's treatable but not curable.
Yeah, it's wild, and it is crazy. Like you mentioned, like the direction it took going from like stepmom, all that kind of stuff. It's like, and I feel like in a way, it's made the younger generation that consumes it like more demented. Like
Oh,
they're like kind of
they
fucked up now.
they walk up to me and call me mom and mommy all the time. And it's so disturbing. It's disturbing to me because I believe a mom is someone that deserves a great deal of respect. A
I
mom
agree.
is someone that carried a child and raised a child, and a mom should be treated respectfully. And to make fun of that is just like, it's weird. And also, I can only imagine how it impacted stepmoms around the US, because I've read stories about stepmoms being approached by their stepsons in a very pornographic way and making them feel that they couldn't stay in the relationship that they were in with the other parent, with the spouse. Like, we've done that. We've created that mindset, and it's not healthy and it's unnecessary. If you need to go to such a place of a kink or to such a place of a story, then you're not connected with your own sexual wellness at all. And you don't know what your things are. Like, look, feet are like the biggest thing ever. And I just got a 2-page description from somebody about why feet are the biggest thing ever because I had mentioned it on an IG live, and I died reading this message because it's like, well, they're never shown. It's something still that you could see somebody walk down the street in their shoes, and one I'm like, why do you have to go there? Why are you staring? Why? I don't ever. What happened to you? Why? I'm just pretty basic when it comes to sex, and so like I don't need all of those extra things on this list to make me be like, oh yeah, I'm horny now. We've talked about feet. There's guys that are into armpits. There's guys that are into the just most niche things, and to me, that's just there's a bigger problem.
I would
Yeah.
agree with that.
Well, you talk about it just keeps getting bigger and bigger, the industry. How do you like solve the problem of these demented minds? Like, I mean, what's the solution long term, or is it just going to keep getting worse?
Well, I think people forget, they use the term free speech. When Elon Musk came out and said, we're allowing porn on Twitter, and everybody like, that's great, it's free speech. It's not free speech. Porn has nothing to do with free speech. Our First Amendment, yes, does give us these rights, but if it were free speech, then I should be able to go and buy cigarettes with free speech at 15, or I should be able to go and buy alcohol with free speech at 12.
Mhm.
No, it is a government regulated product for a reason. And the reason it is because we wanted to be sure that with the right education in schools and the right age that somebody would see their first thing. And remember, when I was growing up, the only thing you would see is like you'd sneak in to maybe find your dad's stack of magazines. And believe me, there was nothing graphic in these magazines. You could barely see the girl naked. Like it was, she's like laying there. There's nothing open, nothing spread. And if your friends found a VHS, you were so worried that you weren't going to rewind it to the right place and that you'd get caught. Like that was all we had. This access is creating incels, which I'm not sure if you know, but in March of 2022, the FBI did label incels our biggest terror threat. Incels are in America. They are a huge part of America, and they are also linked to most mass shootings and huge ordeals of violence. The reason is when you start watching content too young and you start to kick in the dopamine release, max boost the hormones, you actually skip about a 2 to 3 year development stage, which is from 10 to 13 or 14 for young men. And that age is when you develop empathy. That age is when you are tapping into your emotional feelings. By fast tracking that becomes a very different, you'll notice their jaw lines. Like when you see pictures of incels, you'll notice some very different things about their features because what they did was rush their own hormones and put themselves in a place where their body didn't catch up with their mind. I think we need to have more conversations about the content. I think there needs to be porn literacy in school. I think we need to just discuss the fact that these are stunt people doing something and they're tested and they're aware and there's consent. And there needs to be more of an understanding that it's not real. That it's entertainment. And so I think the only way to really reel it back, because we kind of let the cat out of the bag now, parents need to understand that the second they give their kids a phone, they're going to watch porn, even if they're 10. And is that what you want your 10-year-old doing? No. You want your 10-year-old doing 10-year-old things. I'm not anti-porn. I'm anti-porn in the wrong hands with anybody who maybe isn't able to really process it properly, right? I think that the states need to step in. We see that it's happening because I know friends that travel for sports. They're like, oh, you can't see adult content. And I think in Utah, what states can you not see? I think it's Utah. Do you guys know?
No idea.
I think it's Utah. Texas has some regulations, but parents have to speak to their kids about it as well and say, hey, you're going to see this. Let me explain to you what this is about. And that's really the thing. Look, every year we give a kid a phone younger is every year we're opening up Pandora's box on the risk.
And you know what? It's interesting that point you make about, states or government getting involved. There's that argument, however, that you want the government not involved in your personal life as much as possible. And I understand both sentiments. So for someone that really wants the government to stay out of their life, but they understand like the harsh reality of pornography, how do you balance those two?
I think the best thing, since we are talking government, would be schools, right? Because governments are connected with schools. So the governments offer, a basic class. A speaker comes in. I come in and speak. Hey, so, what are your questions? Here's how many times we got tested. Here's what you need to know about your health. You should be looking at this is what STDs look like. You should be doing this. You should be thinking about this. that curriculum brought back into schools. And if they didn't want to do it with the children, because maybe it was a parental thing, then they could do it at PTA, parent teacher night. Talk to the parents like, hey, so this is something that your kids might be exposed to. Do you want to find a way at home to have a conversation that makes sure that this doesn't derail them in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I
Mhm.
mean, it's one of those things that it's so complex, and and it's not like it's like just a small group. It's millions upon millions, and everyone's different, and for better or for worse. I want to jump back to the early '90s when you were getting involved. In 2024, if I told you that you would be who you are today and as well known and as famous, what would you even say?
That's a great question because I don't really see myself as being famous. I mean, I look at my Instagram numbers. I'm like, oh, I have a lot of followers, but at any moment that can be hacked. I know that people know who I am, but I've always just been this person that's just been creating my own space. And so, not dealing in the ego, not dealing in popularity, just being like, okay, I've created all this out of nothing. I
Yeah.
had 3 goals as a teenager. So, when I was 16, we did a school project. We had to write down our goals. It was like 3 goals. And of course, most of my girlfriends were regular girls from Pennsylvania. And they were like, I want to get married. I want to have a house. I want to have babies. And I was like, okay.
Mm.
I wanted to travel and see the world. I wanted to be financially independent and I wanted to make my own schedule. Those were the 3 things I wrote on my travel keeper. And like those 3 things, my teacher looked at me and my teacher was like, this sounds awful. But it didn't. That was my forward thinking. I just wanted to have those freedoms. I watched my parents not travel and see the world, but yet I got to travel with my grandparents. And I got to see how much
Nice.
happier my grandparents were because they had a motorhome. They would drive up to Canada for the summer and visit family. And they were just always free and it would always been fun. They also made their own schedule because they had their own business. And so I watched my grandparents again. And then being financially independent can come quicker when you're doing your own thing than when you're relying on somebody else. And how many people work for a company for X amount of years and they think their pension and all these things are going to be
Mhm.
there. And then something changes, their position's eliminated or their company gets sold. So those are the guarantees that I found. So to look at me now, I would think I am where I wanted to be, and not when it comes to the fame part, but just the fact that I have filled one full passport and almost filled my second. So I have like 1 page left. I do make my own schedule and I'm financially independent. Those were really the things. It
Love that.
wasn't about being famous. And also remember, in the 90s, when we were doing movies, there was no fame from doing movies. Nobody recognized you. Nobody approached you. Nobody knew who you were because you just looked so different in the movies with big hair, a lot of makeup. And people weren't putting the 2 and 2 together yet. So it's not like you'd be at the mall and some guy would be like, oh, I watched this movie last night. Back then, nobody put the 2 and 2 together. And what happened in people's bedrooms when they watched that movie, they never thought about. I was never, before the internet, recognized anywhere.
Do you recall the
Wow.
first time you were out and someone said, "Hey, are you Lisa Ann?"
I don't. I don't recall, but I know it was the internet because I can remember this. So Lisa Ann is my real name. And in the 90s, a lot of us used our real name. And I remember the internet, there was like these conversations that were going on with me and my girlfriends. It was like, okay, well, we used our real name. Like, we probably should have used a stage name. And then it was like, okay, like everyone's going to know who we are now. Okay. And then I can remember us all in the very beginning just Googling ourselves. Like you would just Google yourself. Like it wasn't Google back then when we were on AOL. I'm sorry. When we were on
It was.
dial up. And it was just weird to know that eventually you were going to Google yourself and it would be like there were a million searches per second of your name. You're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Speaking of family, when you did first get involved in the industry, what were your friends and family's reactions?
So I don't have a relationship with my family now, and I didn't have a relationship with my family then. I
Mm.
bought a one-way ticket to get to California, and I had never flown before. And I
Oh,
pretty
wow.
much told nobody because I just wanted to stick to my mission and do my thing. So it wasn't until later in life when I had little bouts where I reconnected with family. And they were always incredibly disappointed. Like to them, it was the worst thing I could have ever done with my life. And what's great about the world we live in now is I have so many friends in the industry that their parents are supportive, they love them unconditionally. And what I see is those are the performers that are less likely to do drugs, less likely to be bad with their money, because they really want to prove their parents, like, thanks for supporting me. I'm doing this the right way. And so I see a completely different response in their entire existence in this space because they have that love and support at home. I just reconnected with my friends from high school. during the pandemic. It was our third year high school reunion. I saved it. It was my first time going home to see my friends. And then it was canceled because of the pandemic. And I was like, great. I joined this
Mm.
Facebook group. And what I was most
Yeah.
impressed with was how proud of my journey my friends from high school with. I go home and see them regularly now. How they read my book. My first book was out by then. And just how like excited they were to hear about what my life has been like. So that was a really, really cool experience.
It's funny you say that. So this morning, actually, Evan and his twin Ethan and I, the three of us were on the phone, and we were talking about effort, and we said like the universal language of respect is effort, and regardless of the industry, regardless of what you're doing, like anyone can respect effort, whether it's towards like building a podcast, building a business, trying to go professional in a sport, like even in 9 to 5, any effort should be respected, in our opinion.
Yeah, I completely
So
agree. And I think
Mhm.
it's lost on some people to realize that just because nobody's watching doesn't mean you shouldn't want to put that effort forth.
well, especially like the route you took is so independent too. Especially like I find that admirable. You know, you went out to California by yourself. Did you know anyone or anything at the time, or you totally
Okay,
just
so
sent
I
it?
only knew the people that I had been writing to by mail, and I knew the girls that I had met at Owl's Diamond Cabaret, the club that I worked at for 2 years, and interviewed them. But you have to remember something. We're kind of like just at the beginning of phones. More people had pagers than phones. So it was one of those things where you're like, you'd go to a payphone, you'd page somebody, and you'd hope they'd call you back. It was harder to connect, but it was a solo mission. And I'm so glad I did it. It was definitely, I bought it. It was a 4th of July because I was like, I'm going to do this on 4th of July. It's my independence. And I just remember being so excited when I landed in California.
Have you been to the Playboy Mansion, and if so, what's that experience like?
I did not go to the mansion. That's one of the things I didn't do. But you know what's funny is I didn't do any of the party things that everybody else did. So that was a common thing. I lived an hour outside of LA. I made sure I lived in Huntington Beach because coming from
Nice.
Pennsylvania, I didn't want to be landlocked. I wanted to be by the ocean. I wanted to watch the sunset. I wanted to go to the beach. So I was like, if you're going to live out here, you can commute, drive up to LA or 4 or 5 days a month. You got to be up there. But so a lot of people were doing things I wasn't. And I realize now how great that was for me because a lot of them got wrapped up in the lifestyle. A lot of people partied. There were a lot of drugs. And I can remember one of my very first events where I was seeing some of the stars that I had met at my home club. And I was disappointed just by seeing how much they partied and how much, they did drugs. And I was like, oh, well, okay, I guess these people won't be my friends. And
Mhm.
now I've got, which was great because it made me make friends. And then I had to explain to friends, like, this is what I do for a living. I hope you don't judge me. It's going to be harder to make friends. I know this, but those are still my neighbors from Huntington Beach are still my best friends to this day.
Well, and that's
Wow.
definitely contributed to your longevity. Would you agree with that? I mean,
Yes.
not being in that scene, especially now, what in New York, podcasting, sports, fantasy, like we talked about this when I went on your show, the pivot you made, I don't think many people can do that.
And I think it takes a lot of having a life outside of whatever you do for a living. You don't want to hang out with all your peers, your coworkers all the time, no matter what. But what I did see was unnecessary drama and things because they were spending too much time together. And I was like, I'll enjoy everybody at the trade shows. And that will be like when I get to catch up. And then on my free time, I'm going to be with people outside of the industry that have other careers and lifestyles that I can learn about so I can stay well versed and well rounded. And also, those friends help me stay grounded because when you go out to dinner with girls in the industry because they make a ton of money, they'll order a million things. When you go out to dinner with regular people, they order their one thing. And that was always good for me to be aware of in my early 20s of like, oh, this is how my friends are saving money. And this is why these people have no money saved. So I was always observing and always like, this is a better fit for me because I don't want to live.
Mhm.
This money has to last forever. And I would tell girls all the time, this money has to last you. There's no guarantee you're going to have another walk of life. There's no guarantee you're going to get another job. So saving is paramount. And it was just different seeing how two worlds lived.
Lisa, when you did retire, was there a void for a little bit? When did you make the decision that I want to do a podcast and be kind of a content creator?
I was already kind of in the mix of a lot of other things before I retired. And in
Okay.
2013, I signed my first contract with SiriusXM. And I was with them for 2 years before I retired. So I had this plan where it was like, okay, once I have my first contract, if I get my second. And I always had a lot of other things going on. I was working on my book. I would do a lot of personal appearances outside of the industry, like hosting at nightclubs and doing those things. I knew I had enough going on in all of these spaces that just eliminating one thing wasn't going to be that difficult. What was difficult was just the adaptation of realizing that a lot of people that I thought may have been a friend were really just only around me because they were making money from me, right? So that's the
Yeah.
harshest thing. You rip off the band-aid on that, you're like, oh, I thought we were friends. Oh, we weren't. But you just got to be prepared for that. And there was a time, 2013 was one of the toughest times I ever saw in the industry. And that was a time that made me say, you have to go, and you have to go in the very near future. We were shut down for almost half of that year. We get shut down for HIV outbreaks, syphilis, anything that's treatable and not curable. The industry shuts down for anywhere from 30, 60 to 90 days. And it's rigorous testing. Thousands of people have to just keep retesting. And there was a point that year where one of the companies came out and said, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give everybody a shot. And once you take this shot, you'll be able to go back to work. We're not going to do this retesting. And I was like, this is insane. No one can tell me what's in this shot. My fear was the shot was going to skew future tests. And so I couldn't go back to work for like 3 months because if you weren't willing to take the shot, you had to continue to test.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, not a problem
Yeah.
for me. Yeah, it sounds familiar, right? Which was fine because I had other things going. I could feature dance. I could do adult bookstores. I could do hosting events. I always had enough other work that when the industry shut down for those period of time, I was not in jeopardy financially. But what I learned through that year that upset me the most was the kind of gossip that goes on within the business when people are trying to find out the truth. Is someone HIV positive? Is someone who has syphilis? We know someone has syphilis because it's spreading right now who has syphilis. And the lies, the manipulation, they're a D-list performer. We shouldn't even be worried about it. Nobody worked with them. Like the stupidity was what made me go, you need to get out of here for your own health reasons. No matter how much you love being here, you gotta go. And that year was really a big one for me.
Moments like not moments, but periods in time like that are definitely pivotal. But that led to your podcast growing. So when you started the Lisanne Experience, I think you're 140 something episodes in now. From episode 1 to now, how have you evolved as a speaker?
So I'm 140 in on my own. SiriusXM had my
140,
podcast
okay.
for like 6 years. And then before that, I was with, so I've been podcasting forever. The biggest help for me was just learning how to put together a show. And I learned that through working with SiriusXM. And working with SiriusXM also gave me broadcast classes, anything I wanted to learn at any time I could. And now I'm constantly studying the craft. I don't know about you two, but I have my favorite broadcasters that I can be listening to. And you hear them do things that are so smooth, like when they transition from a story to a guest and they announce them perfectly. And you're like, oh, I'm passionate about that.
Yeah.
Like that is such a gift. Like also a really extensive vocabulary. To be an actual wordsmith like Greeny. I listen to Greeny every morning on ESPN. I'm like, man, I don't think he repeats the same adjective once a show. Like it's amazing. So I just continue to find joy in it. Finding joy in something, whether you're making money in it or not, it's going to make you want to get better at it. I've seen myself become a better listener. And look, there's still going to be days where I record a podcast. I go back and listen. I'm like, oh my gosh, you were awful today because you're not always on. But I've improved. I've slowed down, and enunciation becomes a really big thing. And so when you listen to how you spoke a year or two before you started podcasting, you realize how much podcasting fine-tooth combs your whole presentation of how you speak.
Depending on the guest, the preparation really differs. So if we have an athlete on or, someone involved in sports, it's a much, I would say, smoother conversation opposed if we have a doctor on and that's 2 weeks of preparation, watching his videos, reading whatever he has out. It's totally different ball game. And I think Rogan's talked about it, talking to his buddies that are fellow comedians or talking to like a neurophysicist. Like it's a different ball game. I'm sure you've experienced this.
Yeah, and Rogan is so good. I mean, he's just a great conversationalist, and he knows how to bring things out of people. But he also is really good at sitting back. When you listen to old school broadcasters like Howard Stern, he interrupted his guests a lot, And as somebody that wanted to hear what the guest fully had to say, I would be like, oh, he interrupted. So that's something Rogan doesn't do. We've all gotten better at those things, but the preparation is different. And for you guys with sports, it's the same as me. It's because you're comfortable with it. You might even know the stats by heart. You might even know this player's entire history by heart because we love sports. So it's easier.
And speaking of preparation, how do you go about preparing for your own podcast?
I think if the easiest way is listening to other podcasts that the guest was on,
Yeah.
right? Because that you don't ask the same question. My favorite thing really is interviewing authors, and it's only because I love to read, and it gives me this like, okay, I have to read this book cover to cover. I'm sitting down, I'm turning off my phone, and because I love to read so much, just the fact that I can make that a work project and be like, sorry, but nothing else matters right now until I cover to cover read this book. Like, I just did 2 cover to cover reads, and I'm going to approach both authors to get them on my podcast.
Nice.
What are some must reads for our listeners?
Of course, The Power of Habit, I thought was a great book. First Things First is a great book. I just gave it to a girlfriend of mine. I'm seeing the cover. It was a really big book last year. Oh gosh, I can't think of the name of it right now, but I just gave it away because I give away a lot of books that I read. The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck is a great book. And I just finished Stephen King's book on writing. And what was great about it was the fact that I can't read any Stephen King because I don't do any gore or violence or anything like that. And this was his book about him writing. And I was like, finally, I get to read a Stephen King book.
The same way Joe Rogan will have comedians or fighters on to promote a product or get something off their chest. Do you feel your show is the equivalent for former adult film stars or even current?
I don't interview as many adult film stars on my podcast. I do a lot on Lisa Ann's Backstage Combos, which is brought by Sapphire. I do and I don't. I try to keep my podcast a little bit more of a range because I find I've had some great interviews with girls in the industry, but a lot of them I've had some not so great interviews as well. It's a fickle beast, right? So what are you promoting right now? What do you want to talk about? I don't want one word answers, like those kinds of things. But I'm looking at Brandy Love on in the near future because I know Brandy will be a great interview.
Probably get a lot of views on that too.
Yeah, sure. Lisa, at this point in your career, what is success for you? How has that changed from now to when you first started?
Success to me now compared to when I first started is definitely calmer. It's definitely more content. You're always chasing that high when you first start doing something. Like, it's got to be so extremely amazing. And so when you get that high, there's going to be those lows. And I think once you get to this rhythmic point in life where you're like, all right, you know what I mean? I just want things to be consistent. I want to be on schedule. I want to be able to handle the things on my plate, but not push myself too hard. And I want to know that if it's a beautiful evening and I can step away from my computer and sit out on my patio with a book, that I can do that. That's part of success to me, is just having free time and being able to use that free time however I want. I became a minimalist in 2017. I got rid of 75% of my belongings. And it was a very powerful tool in my late 40s because it taught me a lot about money and your relationship with money, and how when we're successful as Americans, we just believe that it means you should buy more stuff and have more things. And when I decided to kind of strip it all away, I'd watched the documentary, The Minimalists. I'd reached out to them. I listened to their podcast. I'm a regular guest on their podcast. And I was like, this makes a lot of sense of how I want to think about the rest of my future. And if you continue in that rat race, you're just going to continue to work, spend money, buy things, take care of those things, have those things outgrow your place. You're getting more and more space. And so becoming a minimalist also changed how I look at success and how I look at what I want to do with my free time, and especially how I look at what I want to do with my money. And so when you're in that space, you now need to work a bit less because you're not driving as hard or pushing as hard to make so much money. There's no need for so much money. There's more need for peace, making sure that I have more time for charity and for other people, making sure I can be a good mentor, making sure I can be a good friend, a good neighbor. Those are the things that became really important to me in my 50s. I turned 52 in May, and I think this is a good age to really think about how are you going to spend the next 50 years? And for me, it's going to be giving back, sharing my time, and needing less from me and making myself more available for others.
That's a great answer.
Yeah, I
And
love
I
that
know
response.
almost every successful person we've had on our show, they always talk about how they need to value their time. And like you get to an age and the money is just the money, but the time is something you can never get back,
Can't get it
whereas
back.
you can get any amount of money back.
And you also, as you get older, you look back at things you missed because you chose to work, do a gig. For me, I was on the road so many weekends of the year that I never got to go to friends' weddings. I never got to
Yeah.
do those things. And I look at it now when somebody invites me to somewhere, I'm like, that is important. They invited me, I'm going to go. Where that wasn't as big of a deal when I was younger.
If you were 20 right now, would you do the same thing you did and be in the industry?
Okay, I would only do it if you would allow me to go back to what the business was like in the 90s. I don't want it to be the internet. I don't want it to be all of that yet. I would like to also go back. Remember, there was no social media. That gave me 5-6 hours of my life back a day. The constant feedback. It's really like, for me, it would have to be laid out almost exactly the way that it was. And that's an impossibility. And now when I look at young creators getting into this space, the first thing I tell everyone is to really think about a business plan. This is a business like anything else. You have to have a plan. And I think when you're going into the entertainment space, you just want to make it and you don't think about a plan. But it's still work. You still have to have a plan. So I don't know if it would be conducive to me in the environment that we're in right now. And I just don't know with the talent pool. I mean, in the 90s, there was like 25 of us. You knew every girl in the business. There was very few of us. And it was just so different. Now you could name 25 girls that came in the business just this past year.
So Lisa, I want to ask you a very serious and important question here before we let you go. For any young men listening to this, what advice would you give to any young man that is and finds themselves addicted to pornography?
That's a great question. And asking yourself what you're doing with your time, we just mentioned time, is the most important thing you could be doing. So if you find yourself being tempted to go and watch adult content and consume your time, please set a timer on your phone. Put a note in your phone. Ask yourself at the end of the week, is that how I feel good about spending 10 hours of time this week? Was that productive for me, or was that self-serving? You also have to remember that when you're taking yourself and watching content and you're satisfied afterward, you're most likely not going to go out and engage and work on your social skills on how you talk to women. And so we end up with the next problem is, oh, there's been no need for me to engage with a woman because I've been doing my thing watching content. And now I'm a 30-year-old virgin, which is way more common now because of the internet and adult content than ever before. And when guys come to me in messages, of course, I run an OnlyFans page. I use it for my library of the many years of content that I own. I'm in the messages. I do live chats. I do these dating ask me anythings that are wild. But I will, it just, because what I realize is, like, because you were able to have this experience on the internet and it mimicked what you thought your experience should be, you never learned how to communicate with a woman. It's a very lonely life in your 30s. And then you're coming to strangers like, what should I do? I'm a virgin. I'm like, man, I was saying, like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, it's way beyond my understanding. I would see a psychologist. I would see a therapist. The one thing I do recommend to everyone is get involved in local charity of choice. Get involved in something in your community where you're a neutral person, where you can just meet new people. Because even though you might not meet somebody you're going to date there, you're going to meet people there. They're going to introduce you to other people. But for each one time you want to go back down that rabbit hole, try and find something more productive to do with your time. I'm not anti-porn. I don't want anybody to be anti-porn, but I do think there's a time and a place. And if you are putting that before you've had your own sexual experiences, then that's going to become ultimately your biggest problem and your biggest battle.
Last question for you here, Lisa. What is the hardest part about being Lisa Ann?
I think the external pressures of everybody expecting so much from me. I looked at it like, I'm getting into this job where nobody's going to ever expect anything from me. Who's going to ask me for advice? And I'm blown away that that's not the case. The funnel that I am, picture a funnel, right? And picture Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, my page, and everybody coming at me. It's the pressure of millions of people coming at you and everybody expects you to have an answer. Everybody expects you to be able to help them or answer them or be there for them. It's a bit toxic. And I think that's probably the hardest thing. Like today I wasn't feeling well. I was like, all right, just take a Dayquil and lay down for 20 minutes. And I laid down for like 3 minutes. And in my mind, all I could hear was all the stuff that I need to do and all the people that are trying to reach me. And I had to get up. I was like, just get all your work done. That's hard. The external pressures of other people. Because I just want to live in peace.
That's a great answer. Well, speaking of peace, I feel at peace knowing that this was a great episode. I appreciate you joining us here, Lisa. It was a month after coming on your show. It is an honor to welcome you onto ours. So thank you again for joining us. This was a lot of fun.
I'm super excited that now I'm going to be on your podcast because here we are. I've listened to almost every episode. And since I got Walk Sauce on my podcast and it'll be coming out in a couple of weeks.
Oh, yeah?
I've just met some interesting people through you. I love what the two of you are doing. And this year, more important than ever, we should be not talking politics.
I got to listen to that Walk Sauce interview. I'm happy you guys got together.
It's not out yet. It'll be out next month. I'll let you know when it's coming out. But it's really nice to meet you.
Absolutely. Lisa Ann, thank you once again. We will see you soon. Everyone have a great rest of your day. And thank you for joining us. Peace.